Okay, so this here is just an example of the autonomic variococytes, and so the distinction between here, this one, and your normal synapses or your somatic synapses is in the middle of your axon. You actually have a swelling, and so it forms this like bulb here rather than at the very end, and so it actually releases those neurotransmitters in the synaptic vesicles, and then they're able to sit there and find their receptors along that surface. Now, so you guys remember when we're talking about the autonomic response, we're talking about more of the reflexes type response. So these are going to be dealing with the sympathetic and the parasympathetic type of responses that we're making reference to. So in this case, we're going to sit there and have let's say more access to this. And so this is going to be happening along those smooth muscles. So this is going to be occurring along the smooth muscles and the intestinal tract, things like that. So you're going to have more of these type of synapses connections compared to what you're going to see in the case of the somatic type connections, what happens more with the skeletal muscles. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So and can you guys see my slides? Just want to be sure.
Yes. Looking at figure 15.
It's actually showing the comparison between the two responses. So in the case of the autonomic pathway, we would basically have, excuse me. So we could have the spinal column send a signal via the neuron, and then it'll actually go to that central neuron synapses with ganglia here at the center. So this will be the ganglionic nerve, where the ganglionic nerve is connected, and then that will be going off to our effector targets, which in this case, again, is the case of the smooth muscles. And then where in the somatic effector and pathway, you're basically going from the spinal column or the spinal cord, and then you're going to end up going to somatic motor nerve, and then that somatic motor nerve is going to be going to skeletal muscle. Okay. And where it's going to be directly connecting to the skeletal muscle. And so in this case, you have those terminal ends. So where you have the bulb and the vesicles being released in the synapses connection. Okay, so in one case, you're not going to have it's more of a travel, like we're traveling through. And so you're not getting to that terminal end. And in the other case is going to be located at the very end, and you're directly connecting with that target effector. Okay, so this here is a schematic of the referred pain chart. So this basically lets us know approximately where we feel certain types of pains that are associated with it, right? And so often when we're having pains in our lungs and in our diaphragm, we kind of feel it in our neck, and shoulder regions. When you're having pain that's dealing with your heart is located on your left-hand side, right? But you feel the pain on your right-hand side. So often when you're having a heart attack or just general let's see. The first place that you typically feel it, again, it will be on your right-hand side. And so often it's associated with your arm. You'll feel it in your arm, in that inner part of your arm, from the pinky on up. And like the kidney, you'll often feel it in that lower abdomen area. Where some things are more located where they're at, like for instance, your stomach. So the pains that's associated with your stomach, you often feel in your stomach, right? And so can you guys kind of relate to that? Have you ever had a really bad case of heartburn, and where did it start at? No one? Or
Like around my chest area. It was really, really hot, and not hot, more like acidic.
acidic? Yeah. And did you feel it like often, you feel it overall, it'll be that whole region that's hurting. But if that initial pain starts on the right-hand side, at least from my experience, it's always started on the right-hand side, and it just seems to amplify from there, right? So it'll be, for me, when I get like really bad cases of heartburn, it always ends up starting here. So often we'll mistake it for like I'm going through a heart attack or anything like that, where it's just kind of like the track where it goes. It's very similar to where you get those first pains if you were having some type of heart. Okay. Anybody had, let's say, their appendix removed or anything like that?
My niece had her appendix removed.
Yeah. And so, that's in the lower abdomen on the right-hand side, the right-hand side.
Like right
And
under her belly button.
Yep.
Here.
Yep. And actually, but a little lower though, a little lower than the belly button. So, yep. So, and then often with the small intestines, it'll be like the belly button region, So, and this kind of leads to part of the reason why we have that perception or we feel those senses is because the route that the things take. So like often, when we're looking or we're seeing things with our eyes, on the right-hand side, if we're looking at something, but it's being processed on the left-hand side, and so it's just the route that it's going through. So because of that route, we're receiving that pain with that area that the reflexes are, I should say, the sensory is being felt, So this here is basically an example of the short and long reflexes. Okay, so like in the case of the long reflex here, so we have the sensation that we feel. The sensory receptor cell picks it up, it transfers the signal to the central nervous system. So that'll be either the brain or it'll be the spinal cord. And then from there, it'll actually send the reflex out and then to the peripheral ganglion. And then the peripheral ganglion will actually send the reflex continue to the effector. Okay. And then for the target. So these guys are going to be associated with those long responses are going to be associated with the somatic nervous system. And so like, for instance, when we're trying to figure out if the water is too hot or too cold, right? We touch it, we get the response, it goes to our brain, move your hand, the water's hot or the water's cold, right? And then as a result of that, we move our hand, okay? So in the case of the short response, the short reflex, we get the sensation, the sensation, instead of going all the way to the central nervous system or like the spinal cord or anything like that, it just goes to that peripheral ganglion. And there, it'll actually send the reflex, the response. And so in this case, it goes from that peripheral ganglion, then it goes to the effector. Okay, so in this case, we're getting that response in a more timelier manner, right? So a quicker response to it. Now, part of that, it could be due to the complexity of the reflex that's going on. So in one case, we may need our brain to sit there and tell us, okay, you need to move those muscle cells, stuff, sit there and do it. Where in the case of your parasympathetic nervous system, you just need to kind of respond, and it's kind of like a candid response. So there's not too much more to it. Hey, you need to digest something, or so it doesn't require too many signals or too much movement. It's just, hey, you need to do this real quick in a quick, timely manner. Does that make sense? Are you with me?
So, sort of.
Sort of.
Bit of confusing.
Let's see if I can clarify this a little bit better. So, okay, so in the uppercase, right, you're going to require a response, some type of response for, let's say, your muscle movement. Pull your hand away, right? Let's see, the stove is hot. Pull your hand away, right? So your temperature receptor takes in that response. It goes all the way to your brain, and then by the time you pull your hand away, you're partially burning your hand, but you recognize. Where in the case of the shorter response, it's more localized, right? It doesn't have to go, it doesn't travel so far, but it's something that needs to be taken care of continuously. It often has to do with your smooth muscles, things that aren't complicated, but it needs to be done automatically. Does that make sense?
Like breathing or like walking?
Yes, like breathing or digesting food. It's like, you don't tell yourself, okay, I have to digest food. It just does it automatically, right?
So the long reflex is for stuff that has to happen now, and the short reflex is what usually always happens.
Yes, in a way, yes.
Okay.
Okay, because, well, and I say in a way because there are short reflexes that we have that don't always happen. Because, like, for instance, the fight or flight type of situation, right? Under those circumstances, it's not because it's always happening, because you're not always being chased by, a woolly mammoth or T-Rex or whatever. I guess a woolly mammoth wouldn't scare you too much, except it's going to trample you, but like a T-Rex, right? So, you have that signals. And so there's certain things that pop up as a quick response to that are going to be your autonomous system, and it's not going to be your central nervous system. But your central nervous system, the one that refers to your central nervous system, are often the ones that require a little more voluntary motion or voluntary movement, where the ones that are requiring that quicker response or those shorter responses are more so those involuntary,
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Is that a little clearer?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So in your body, you're going to have competition that's going to be occurring. Part of the competition is going to be the neurotransmitters that are going to be traveling through the bloodstream and everything like that. And those are not the bloodstream in the synaptic response. So you're going to have some of the neurotransmitters that are going to be being submitted for the sympathetic nervous component or sympathetic division, and then part of it that's going to be neurotransmitters that are going to be for the parasympathetic. And so both of those guys are going to be being released. And so you're going to have a nice balance going on to sit there and kind of control it. Okay. And so that balance, you need that sense of homeostasis that is occurring in the autonomous nervous system as well too. So that means that since you have both of those divisions that are going to be happening, and they have different jobs, right? So we know that the parasympathetic division, that's going to be for, like we said, rest and digest, right? So that's you're breathing normally and just kicking back and eating, and your stomach digesting and breathing and all of that. So it's the nervous system that's going to be responsible for that part of it. And then you're going to have the sympathetic nervous system, which is that fight or flight response, where, okay, I've got to fight this thing, or I'm going to have to run real quick, you know. And so you're constantly receiving signals from both of those, and there has to be a control over it. Okay. So an example is the control over the pupillary size. So here, if we are getting light being received, and the light is a dim light, very dim light. So the sympathetic system is basically going to stimulate the cervical vertebrae. Then that's going to go to the central nerve. Central neuron synapses, and then it's going to sit there and cause an action potential or a stimulation of the superior cervical ganglion, and then that is going to go to the sympathetic postsynaptic neuron, which is going to release norepinephrine, and that's going to stimulate the radial muscles to contract. And so as a result of that, we're going to end up with dilated pupils. Okay. And so in the case of that, we started it again in the spinal cord to sit there and get this guy initiated. Now, if we shine bright light at the eyes, so then that one is going to be it's going to basically stimulate the Edner Westphal nuclei, and that is going to stimulate that parasympathetic central nerve, and then that is going to go, and then that's going to that central nerve synapses is going to synapses with the cellular ganglion of the prevertebral ganglia, and then the parasympathetic post neuron is going to release the acetylcholine, and then that's going to stimulate our pupils to contract, and so we're just going to get contraction at that case. Hold on one second. Sorry, too many things going on in a day. Okay, so where do we leave off? Okay, so in one case we have pupils dilating, and in another case we have pupil constricting, right? So in the case of dim light, so if we think about it, we go in the dark, and then if you guys go in the dark, does it take time for you to actually start being able to see things? Like say all of a sudden you just turn the lights off?
You have to adjust.
Okay, so when you're adjusting, and this process of adjusting, this also kind of deals with that short response versus that long response. So in this case, this is going to be one, even though it's the sympathetic, it's part of the sympathetic or the autonomous nervous system, you're going to have this long reflex. It's not going to be one of the short reflexes because it takes a moment for your eyes to sit there and adjust. And so, and then if you notice, it's like your eyes are they're going to dilate because they're trying to get in more light, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where on the other hand, when somebody shines bright light to you, perhaps checking you out to see if you've been smoking pot or whatever, they shine in your eyes to see whether or not your pupils could quickly contract. So that quick contraction is one of the shorter responses or shorter reflexes, right? Mm. Where it took us time for it to adjust, and then although our eyes are going to be able to adjust fairly fast, but okay, are you with me?
Yeah.
And part of that response is also where its location is at, you know? So here we have somebody shining light in your eyes, so it's actually going to be sending that signal. And so you get the action potential from the right eye reaches both the right and the left pretectoral nuclei. And so then what happens is that it sends the reflex. Okay, so then when it sends a reflex, you have the pretectoral nuclei that's going to be stimulated on both sides. And as a result of that one eye being stimulated, right, with the brightness, it's going to cause both your eyes to sit there and to contract, right? And so your pupils are going to get smaller in that case, right? Are you with me?
Yes.
Okay. So now here's the thing, right? So one eye is getting extra light and one eye is getting not as much light, right? So you get the one that's really bright and you get the one that it isn't being stimulated. So one, they're putting the light in that eye. Now, but both your eyes restrict, even though this guy is not getting as much light to it. So why isn't this eye dilating to try to compensate for the light that you're getting over here? Or is it?
Is it because one eye is getting like more direct light than the other?
Okay. So in the case of one eye is getting that stimulation, and like I said, it's sending those signals out. And as a result of it sending those signals out, it does send a response to both of the eyes saying, hey, we're being, and so it's like an override. So even though you have this balance that is continuously going on, in this case, this signal is being more amplified than the one that you're getting with the little bit of light, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And so it does mess up with the homeostasis, but you have one eye, both eyes are going to constrict, where, and rather than one constrict and the other one dilate, right?
Okay.
Which would be pretty cool if that could happen. Okay, so, and that's because the way that the signal is being received, it's receiving that one that is more, even though that the other one is sending the signals, hey, there's not enough light. One signal is stronger than the other, and it's activating a different part of the nervous system, right? One is the somatic nervous system, or I'm sorry, one is the sympathetic division, and one is the parasympathetic, and one overrid the other. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. Okay, so in the case of the fiber tracts of the central autonomous system, so you have the hypothymus. The hypothymus is it's an organ that makes a lot of the hormones and things like that, and receptors that are going to be needed for the stimulation. So the hypothymus is kind of like that organ that is combining the endocrine system along with the nervous system. So they're kind of conjoined in that way. So so it's also responsible for the central control of that system. Okay, so it's going to be able to receive inputs from cerebral structures. So that's going to be like your brain and your spinal cord and things like that. And then it's also going to be able to project to the stem of the brain, the spinal cord, that's going to be able to regulate and balance both the sympathetic and the parasympathetic inputs that are going to be received by the organs. Okay, and when we look at the main paths, so we have for these fiber tracts, so they're going to be the forebrain bundle up here, and then you're also going to have your dorsal longitudinal fasciculus region, and I'm not showing it very well here, right here. Okay. Let's see. There's one other thing that I wanted to say about balance. Okay. Okay, so this is the limbic load. So the limbic load is going to be responsible for your emotional responses. It's also going to be responsible for memory function. So a lot of things are going to commit to memory. So, for instance, the amygdala. So this guy is it actually sends signals to the hypothymus, and that basically deals with anxiety. So, like for instance, if you're getting worked up and everything like that, it'll send a signal to the hypothymus, and then that's going to stimulate that fight or flight response. And so, like, let's say you get a little bit of anxiety, or there's like a traumatic event or something like that you're kind of scarred by. So this region is what's going to be the region that's going to be stimulated, and it's also going to be the region that's going to start sending some of the signals. And so again, this is it's able to recognize, it picks up those signals that that causes that, and then it's able to send out signals as a response to that. So you're getting the connection of both of those events. And so at that point, you're going to start stimulating, or you're going to start expressing stress hormones as a direct result of that. And then those stress hormones are going to be responsible, and they're going to be controlled through the endocrine system. Okay.
Mhm.
Questions, concerns, Cash, credit?
All good.
Okay. Let's see. Okay, so there's going to be autonomic connections between the heart, connections to the heart and to blood vessels. So, like for instance, you have nicotine receptors all along the autonomic ganglia, and but the receptors that are responsible for the cardiovascular part, they're not going to be shared with. They're going to be specific to that cardiovascular component, right? And so you're not going to have competition that's going to be occurring between those receptors that deal with nicotine. So let's see the best way of saying this. So oops, you have the parasympathetic. You have the receptors that are going to be associated more so with the parasympathetic function, and then you have the ones that are going to be associated with the sympathetic function. So even though you have nicotine receptors along that whole part, those nicotine receptors aren't going to stimulate the parts of that nervous system that says, okay, you need to continuously breathe and stuff like that. Now it's going to affect the system, right? Because we know that when we smoke cigarettes and everything like that, it causes our blood pressure to go up, right? And that's a result of the sympathetic system governing that part of it. So you're getting an increase that way, where that normal heart function, the normal breathing and everything is not being affected, or the normal heartbeat is not being affected because because it has its own its own receptors that is targeting specifically for its own needs. Does that make sense?
Think so.
Okay, so put it simply. Okay, so I have a box here. So we're going to say I have a receptor that looks like this on the surface. And we're going to say that this guy is for the parasympathetic. And then I have a receptor that looks like this. Okay, now this guy is for the sympathetic. Okay, so because this guy is a triangle, it's able to fit into here, right? And it causes the polarization and the depolarization in the membrane, where this guy is a square, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I shouldn't use a square as a good example. This guy can fit in here, but shouldn't use a square. But my square isn't going to be able to fit in here.
Okay.
Okay, although a square was probably not the best choice because it has an angle. Should make it a round.
Oh.
So we'll do it like that. So half moon. Okay, so and because they're they're tailored, there's receptors that are going to be tailored for that. That's going to keep that specificity. Does that make sense? Yes, no, maybe. So this guy can go here, where this guy can only go here. You can't go here.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. So that brings us kind of to the next thing. There are drugs that are able to sit there and mimic some of the neurotransmitters that we see, or some of the ligands for the receptors, the things that actually bind to the receptors. So okay, so we have phenylephrine, so which is able to sit there and mimic the actions of some of the receptors when its drops are being applied to the surface of the eye, and so they cause the eye to basically to dilate. Okay, so then the eyes are looking a lot, fuller and bigger, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so there's other things that also do this as well. So there's a plant called Belladonna that also causes your eyes to dilate and your pupils dilate, so they'll look to get that full eye view. Okay, so in our body we have the norepinephrine. It actually binds to an adrenic receptor, and that receptor is what normally causes our eyes to dilate. And so if you sit there and you have a mimic that does exactly the same thing, it'll cause the eyes to dilate. Okay, and so we have what we call, there's two major types of classes of drugs. We have the mimics, and so we have mimics that are associated with, I can spell right, so we have the Symphyolytic, and we have what we call Symphyolytic. Okay, so symptolytic, basically drugs, they like inhibit the responses, or these guys will mimic, these guys will inhibit or compete or disrupt the function of the neurotransmitter. Okay, where these guys will act just like the neurotransmitter. Okay, so an example of this is and then you want to use for okay, so let's see. In the case of so we have Tylenol, Sinus. Okay, so Tylenol Sinus has it basically has the phenyl epinephrine, and it's known to basically cause decongestion. And so in the case of that, it allows you to sit there. So when you're congested, it allows you to sit there and breathe. And so in the bronchial tract, it'll basically bind to the antigen receptor of that, of the bronchial of the lungs, and then you'll be able to sit there and get nice rest and all that. Okay, so that guy would be a sympathomimetic drug. Where beta blockers. You guys have heard of beta blockers?
Do they involve like steroids for allergy medications?
Beta blockers are often used for to treat cardiovascular disease. So often they'll be used with high blood pressure or people prone to heart attacks. So
like an aspirin?
Not quite the aspirin itself, but yeah, sort of. Well, those are blood thinners. Aspirin actually serves as a blood more so than the beta blocker. The beta blockers are that they bind to what they call beta, the beta receptor, and they inhibit the beta receptor.
Oh, okay.
And so the beta receptor is responsible for vascular constriction and an acceleration of the heart. Okay, so people who basically have heart attacks, suffered from heart attacks, they'll often give them beta blockers because then that keeps their heart from constricting and or that acceleration from occurring. Okay, so and they're called beta blockers, so they inhibit the beta receptors. They bind to the receptor and inhibit it from binding its normal antigen. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something else. So there are also drugs that are going to affect, and so we know that these drugs are basically going to affect that fight or flight. And then we also have the ones that are also going to affect the sympathetic pathway as well. So we have some and your book has a really good table to kind of look at for some of the drugs. If I can spell mnemonics. Okay. Questions?
Nope.
We're doing time.
Propet.
Actually, you guys are done. Oops. Okay, and the last thing is, of course, so this is the Atropia. This plant is from the genus Atropia. It's also known as nightshade or belladonna. So this is the one I was telling you earlier. So a lot of people used to use this to make their eyes dilate. So typically when people were practicing witchcraft, they would take a little bit of belladonna and put it in a drink, and it causes their eyes to dilate. So their pupils are looking so much bigger and everything like that. So they have that what is it? That I want to say religious event, I guess, kind of saying. And in addition, it's also thought to cause some slight hallucinations. What they find out later on is that too much of it, when it's digested, can be fatal. It kills you. Hence nightshade. And then if you look at the berries themselves, they look like very edible berries, and they basically contain anticholinergic cholinergic compounds, and that, like I said, kind of gets you a little bit of a high, and at the same time causes your pupils to dilate for rituals and stuff like that.
Kind of reminds me of people licking frogs.
Yes, yes. So
Is that true with people licking frogs?
yes, that is true. There are certain frogs that cause hallucinogenic effects. And so it's known that people would either, they would extract because the frog is actually secreting a hormone, and that hormone basically causes hallucinogenic effects in us. And so they would either extract that hormone from the frog, or they would lick the frog directly.
Ugh.
Yeah, all in the guise of science.
Yummy.
I think I remember watching a show on Spike where people licked the poison tree frog, thinking it was the other type of frog, and things did not go well.
I bet. Man, that would not be good. I would
Like,
not good at all.
I thought they were the same thing, but apparently they're not.
No. Yeah. No, not all frogs are created equally. So there are and it's surprising. You'd be surprised. There are quite a few toxic species of frogs, or to say, that are detrimental to us in ways, either in terms of our bowels or in terms of other things. But but there are a few that are beneficial to us as well too. Like some of the medications actually came from extracts from amphibians. So
That's interesting.
Wow.
So questions, concerns?
Nope.
Okay.
I want to know how his fish is doing.
My fish?
No,
Or Alejandro's?
Alejandro, yeah, because my ours died. Did Leah tell you?
No, she didn't. She didn't tell me anything. See how many now? You had one by the. Did he die the day that you did the experiment, or days after?
One by the cat, and then the other one that next morning he was dead.
Yeah.
So I gotta go get another one.
Yeah.
And Leah was like, "Mom, we killed him," and I go, "Dr. Henry killed him. It wasn't us."
Oh, you blame me, huh?
Spend an extra 16 cents for the
I
bigger
know,
one.
right? I'm gonna get two
That's
because they
smart.
gotta be together. I know. I gotta get him a little tank though. That was horrible. And he was his living conditions were terrible.
Poor guy.
Yeah. So that's the truth, Dr. Henry.
Okay.
R.I.P. Little Chloe
I
Coleman.
don't know not to let you burn my fish. So.
Yeah. Michelle's fish died too.
Did it really?
She went and bought him a tank, and she's like, "Coleman, look, this one had bubbles and all kinds of cute stuff." And then the next thing I know, she's like, "Jimmy," and then I was looking, I go, "Jimmy looks dead." She's like, "Don't say that." And then she went, and he was, yeah.
Yeah, so sometimes when you move them to a new tank, you've got to condition the tank, and if you don't, or a new water system, you got to condition the water system, because if you don't, they're kind of sensitive. Some of them are.
Wow.
Like basically the filter's supposed to have like gunk and dirt in it because that stuff eats fish poop and pee
Yeah,
and then turns it into like safe-ish water for fish.
yeah,
But if it
Oh,
doesn't do that, it
okay.
just drowns in its own waste.
yeah.
Oh, don't say that. Oh, how sad.
That's why you gotta have like at least 2 weeks of just uh the filter being on and then you just throwing in random fish food so it can like get used to it
Yeah.
That's
with
terrible.
no fish inside.
All right, that's disgusting. But I'll take your fish, Alejandro.
Nah.
I'll babysit.
I don't know if I trust her there.
I know, right? I'm good at taking care of humans. It's just that little fish.
And you would
No.
it's so easy. All you gotta do is feed them, right? Boy.
Yeah, there you go.
No. No more fish besides this lab project.
Yeah.
Fish are hard to take care of.
Yeah. So the next thing that you guys are gonna be doing, you're gonna be giving it a caffeine because caffeine. That's what we're talking about. Caffeine. So we're talking about how like caffeine, the effects that caffeine has on the nervous system, and so you guys are gonna kind of see that effect. So like caffeine is considered sympathetic pathical mimic, mnemonic, and then and so it actually binds to what is called the adenosine receptor, and so having it around will actually cause you to suppress certain things. So, and as a result of that, we get an increase in the sympathetic response. So, we get a little bit more anxiety and stuff like that if we have too much caffeine. And we're on edge, although I get that when I don't have caffeine because I kind of drown those receptors. So, and then we had a talk earlier today was about levels. So if you have very low levels of caffeine, it doesn't have any effect because it doesn't meet that threshold of activating the potential. And then if you increase the amount, you start getting that effect. It meets the effect of activating the potential. And so your heart rate and everything goes up and all of that. And then if you have too much, then you drown out the receptor. And so then you start getting groggy and, so too much caffeine can be bad for you, of course. And so it can also have the effect opposite. So instead of just getting that level where you're all worked up and, your heart's pumping and everything like that, you're not going to heart rate because you have to. And so they're pumping and they're not doing anything. As a result of them being saturated, you just flow through and you're not getting a response to it.
Hopefully it doesn't have a heart attack.
Yeah. And so we got to be careful. Yeah. And so that's why I'm trying to make sure I have the numbers right. Verified.
Dr. Henry, the SSRI medication and caffeine.
Yep.
What happens to the body when you drink, like, because I have a lot of inmates that drink, they take a lot of the antidepressants or anti-anxiety, and then they drink tons and tons of black coffee. So I'm thinking like, and then they have the tremors, and I'm like, okay, naturally I know like you're causing yourself to, pretty much actually happening when they're doing that, because they're trying to suppress it, but at the same time they're kind of drowning it. with.
Yeah. Okay, so in the case of the SSRI, so that's so that there is affecting the serotonin receptors. And so those drugs, they basically they inhibit the uptake of serotonin, right? So they kind of block the receptor itself. And then caffeine, right? So with a combination of caffeine affects the adenosine receptor, right? And so as a result of it, it causes, with them together, it causes an enhancement. And so in that case, they get palpitations. Their heart starts beating really irregular. They start feeling kind of sick to their stomach and very restless. They often have trouble sleeping.
That makes sense.
And in that, because you basically affected two major receptors in that case, right? Where often you'll have what we call like backup pathways. So we'll have one pathway that is able to cause certain events to occur. And then we have another pathway that can cause those same events to occur and maybe something else. And so if you have inhibitors to both of those, and that's what you're doing, you're basically having something that's competing with the natural antigen for the receptor. And then you have another pathway that it's being blocked by another. So then in both cases, you have these two pathways that are kind of joining. And as a result of it, it's enhancing the effect, because now you have nowhere to sit there and counter the effects of blocking both of the pathways. And so
so then it increases like the agitation and stuff.
that's right.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, well, that's it for today. And as I said earlier, you guys, and you'll get an email, and then there'll be a little response. You have labs today. It's going to be apps starting this week. It'll be new next week. The Physio Exo experiment, and then on Wednesday we'll be doing a fish lab. On Wednesday, you guys are going to need your caffeine. You're going to need an empty water bottle and a full water bottle. And you're going to need your conical tube, your 15 mil conical tube, and a 50 mil and a pipetter.
Okay.
And you should try to, if you don't have the original container that I gave you guys the fish in, or if that container is too small, Alejandro, then try to find a container that's going to be big enough so that your fish can swim around a little bit. Because you're going to be looking at his behavior patterns, so his swimming, so you're going to count the number of how often his fins move back and forth, as well as his breathing.
All right.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. Is there anything else that I'm forgetting, Jesse?
Not that I can recall.
Me neither.
Dr. Henry, I have a quick question.
Yes.
When we're done with class, can I meet with you?
Yeah, actually, I would like to meet with you and Leah, so if that's okay.
Okay, cool.
Okay. So on that note, I think that's it. I don't have anything else. Oh, the rest of the, so we'll be going over chapter 16 and 17 on Wednesday. So be ready.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. So Alejandro, I will see you later. And Jesse, I'll contact you after the class and we'll talk.
All right. Have a good day, y'all. Thank you for the
Thank
class.
you.
Bye.
Bye bye.